Hey, Jimbo, you ready for this deal?
Fire in the hole.
Howdy, friends and neighbors. Time once again for the Cowboys of the Osage podcast with your host, Jimbo Snively and Cody Garnett. Now let's sing a little bit about it. Cowboys of the Osage, riding once again. Always got some time for a friend. And here they are, the Cowboys of the Osage.
Howdy, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Cowboys of the Osage podcast, brought to you by the Ben Johnson Cowboy Museum and the Buck and Flamingo Turquoise Shop, both located right here in downtown historic Pawhuska, Oklahoma. It's old Cody over here, and as always, I have my main man with me, Mr. Rodeo historian himself, songwriting dude too, Jimbo Snively. Good morning, Jimbo. Good to see you. Who the heck do we have here today?
Hey, Cody boy, it's another great day in the Osage, man. And Cody, of course, you know we're all about Ben Johnson here at the Ben Johnson Cowboy Museum, naturally. And we've got one of the foremost authorities. She might know more about him than we do. She's been studying him for a long time. She wrote her master thesis on him in college. And now she's writing a book. It's going to be out here in a year. You know, it just takes time for that stuff. But it's called Tall in the Saddle, The Life of Ben Johnson, Hollywood's Real Cowboy. That's a great title.
Can't wait for it to come out.
Yeah.
We're excited here. I can tell you that.
Excited, yes. And so we're just tickled to have her with us today and thank her for coming by to see us. And we're going to talk about her book, talk about Ben Johnson. Don't tell me what we're going to talk about. But Kathryn, welcome to the Cowboys of the Osage podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here, and it's a beautiful day in Pawhuska.
It is. Here I'm wearing a Flaherty shirt in November. How crazy is that?
I know. Well, we've had the nicest fall we've ever had, I think, right here, Jimbo.
Yeah.
Knock on wood. Holy
Need some
moly.
rain, but other than that, it's nice.
We could definitely use a little rain.
Yeah.
What about down in Texas?
Oh, we had a terrible drought this summer, but we got 10 inches of rain a couple of weeks ago, so it was like a year's worth in one week. But our stock tanks, we have a ranch southwest of Fort Worth. Our stock tanks had dried up this summer. We were hauling water around our place, not only for the horses and for the donkeys, but also just for the deer, so that they'd have something to drink, because it was brutal. It's the worst drought I can remember in Texas.
Cody, why do they call them tanks in Texas and their ponds in Oklahoma?
That's the way it is, I guess, Jimbo.
It's the law, isn't it?
Why do they call them tanks down in Texas?
I don't know, but I remember when Ben Johnson was was doing that scene by the tank next to the tank in the Last Picture Show. I remember in the script it referred to it as a tank too. So I don't know. That's what we've always called them.
Right, I know it. Anyway, well, what got you interested in Ben Johnson?
Well,
because most people your age, don't even know who Ben Johnson is.
Oh, I know. Whenever I tell people what I'm doing, they'll either think it's the English poet or the tracker, the Olympic track star. Well, my mother is from Kingsville, Texas, home of the King Ranch, and I spent a lot of time there when I was growing up. And we'd go out to the ranch on the weekends and watch the Cowboys rope. We'd see them come into town, wearing their spurs, getting coffee at the soda fountain and a donut in the mornings, and I just took it for granted that that's what life was like. I didn't realize that I had grown up in one of the birthplaces of the American cowboy, and of course the vaqueros, they're the Quinianos at the King Ranch too, and so I was very interested in that. And then I was born in Hollywood, California, of all places. My mother had escaped Kingsville after she'd gotten divorced in the 1950s, and you don't do that in a small town. So she went out there to be with her sister and met my father in Los Angeles, and they were living in Hollywood when I was born. She got homesick, convinced my father to move somehow from Hollywood, California to Kingsville, Texas. And so I grew up in kind of these both worlds, watching all these movies with my mother, who was a film nut, and especially Westerns. She loved Westerns. John Wayne was her favorite. And hearing about the cattle kingdom down the road and her years there, and watching these movies, these two worlds just kind of interwove in my mind. and just made me really interested in Western culture. So that's what I was studying at Southern Methodist University when this opportunity came up to write about Ben Johnson.
How'd the opportunity come up?
One of my professors there who taught a course on Western history was the biographer of John Ford and John Wayne, and had written a bunch of books about Hollywood. He ended up doing an oral history with everybody from Lucille Ball to Fred Astaire to Ben Johnson. Hundreds and hundreds of these interviews that were housed at SMU. They're now in the Motion Picture Academy Library in Beverly Hills. But he had gotten a gig to edit a series called Hollywood Legends that the University of Mississippi was going to publish. And we'd gotten to know each other. He was kind of my mentor at SMU. And he just came up to me one day after class and said, "How would you like to write about Ben Johnson for your thesis and maybe for a book?" And I just jumped at the opportunity. It just landed in my lap, and it was just I was in the right place at the right time, and I couldn't believe my good luck. I was just thrilled to do it. But it's been a whole lot of work, but it's been wonderful work. I've met a lot of great people.
Well, how do you research? Do you just Google him up, or how do you write?
Well, when I started working on this, there wasn't any such thing as Google. I
didn't want to say.
I went into a lot of libraries. I mean, I did the old-fashioned way. I interviewed a lot of people. The first thing I did, I'm so grateful I had the foresight to do this. The first thing I did was I read that his mother was, 99 or whatever, and I thought, well, I need to get to her first. And so I found the woman who took care of her, a woman named Gertie Epps, who was very kind to me. And Gertie, when Ben and his mother were living out at Leisure World in Arizona, Gertie was one who took care of Ollie Ryder. And so I got Gertie's number, called her, set up an interview. I flew out to Phoenix and drove out to Mesa and interviewed Ollie. And she told me, she said, we just found the family Bible that says that I'm 100 years old, not 99 years old. And man, she had just fallen and had hurt her head, and she had a big bandage on her head. But I was amazed how sharp she was, and she had a strong voice. And we talked for, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. She had a family album, which I think you may have a copy of here at the museum.
Yeah,
that was done for her. Yeah,
we have the whole digitized album there. It plays on a screen back there.
And that, and she let me look through that, and I got a copy of that, and that was very, very helpful. But the first, so I started out with her. I also talked to Helen Johnson Christensen, and then the other person I wanted to reach really on was Harry Carey Jr., which people called him Dobe or Dobie.
Dobie, yeah.
Because he and Ben were kind of best friends during the motion picture days, and he was delightful. I went to Durango, Colorado, where he and his wife Marilyn were living, and interviewed him for over a day or so. Then later they moved to Santa Barbara, and I went to Santa Barbara, where my aunt lives. So it was very convenient to stay with her, and I interviewed him again. So I don't know how many hours I interviewed him, but I have it all transcribed, and and then his book, Company of Heroes. I don't know if anybody out there has read it. I highly recommend it. It's one of the best biographies, autobiographies by an actor I've ever read, because he had such an ear for language and dialogue. He has dialogue in there. He just makes everything come alive. He has a scene where he describes him and Ben Johnson learning how to Roman ride that is just outstanding. And he was just a peach of a guy. I mean, just a smart, funny, real, just wonderful. And he told me some just great stories that are in the book. And I'm so indebted to him, and I'm very sorry that he has passed away, because I really wanted him to see this.
He used to come back to Husker with Ben some.
Oh yeah, I've seen a lot of old pictures of him over here.
Yeah.
His dad was an actor too.
And his mom too.
Very famous actor. Mm-hmm. Yes, he was John Ford's. I guess you'd call him the symbol of the West. Yeah, Harry Carey Jr.
Yep.
John Ford, you may be aware of this, but I just found out a year or two ago, he was filming movies right here in Osage County
Oh, really?
in the silent movie days.
Really? I didn't know that.
And one of his stars came here, Frank Heskett, and they were filming a movie about the tragedies of the Osage. I think it was called The Tragedies of the Osage. The movie's no longer with us. They didn't think that anybody watched these movies ever again, so they didn't store them right. A lot of times they threw them away. I read, when they piled up, they just got rid of them. They didn't think anybody would want to see them again. But yeah, there's a fellow by the name of Frank Heskett here. He was working for John Ford at the time, filming these silent movies right here in the area. Tom Mix was from this area too.
Yeah.
And he ended up marrying an Osage woman here and staying. But we have all of his stuff. I'll show you his hat and his gun belt and a few things that we have in pictures from the movies they filmed here. It's just, it's wild that John Ford was ever here long before, Ben Johnson ever, right when he was born, basically. He was an infant,
And then the movie Killers of the Flower Moon now, did that dovetail at all with the things that John Ford was doing way back when?
Yeah. Well, there was it was a movie about that.
Yeah.
Right when it was all in the middle of it.
Ahead of his time.
Mm-hmm. It was I think it was called The Reign of Terror, the movie, but it's just no longer with us. The same family are still the lawyers for Pahuskin, and they have a copy of everybody that was in that movie hanging on the wall over there in their law office.
He was a peace officer, chief of police or something later on.
Right here in Pahuskin.
Drove a big old Indian motorcycle in the parades and stuff. He's a real neat guy.
Yep. Knew the Osage language.
Yeah.
He was really something, I guess. Old Frank Heskett.
One time, I know I'm right on this, but he lived out there on Clear Creek, and after he got to be an old man, and there were some people broke out of the jail up here, a couple of convicts, and they went down that creek and somehow made it to his house just by chance and thought they was going to rob him. And they had a shootout, and he ended up, I think, shooting some of them, and he might have got shot. He was an old man. Then. He was a tough old booger.
It's just a small world, that John Ford and his brother were here making silent movies. And then, I still got to, let me show it to you real quick. This is a picture of Frank Heskett standing in front of the original Fox Studios.
Oh my goodness! Wow!
It's about as big as this museum, Fox Studios, before it burned down. So that's a picture of Frank right there.
That's great.
And he was at the first Academy Awards. Old Frank Heskett.
You have so many neat things in this museum.
But he was our first movie star from here, I guess.
Yeah, he would have had to been probably.
In the 20s.
Yeah.
I think that Frank Heskett might have been our first movie star.
Yeah. Or Tom Mix, I don't know what they did over there at the 101 Ranch as far as.
Well, I'm saying Osage County.
Yeah, right.
He's the first movie star that, called Osage County home, I think.
Cool.
Probably right.
And John Ford was here. That's just such a close, crazy tie to me,
Yeah, and then he would kind of handpick a guy from one of his westerns to become a star. It was also from Pahuskin. Yeah.
So, for everybody that don't know, could you recount to everyone how Ben Johnson came to be the Ben Johnson that we all know and love today?
Yeah, well, he started out, as he famously said, going to Hollywood with a load of horses for Howard Hughes' movie The Outlaw, and he and Hughes. This is another fascinating thing about the book, about Ben Johnson's life, is he interacted with so many famous people in the movie business that you might not expect. Like Howard Hughes seems like the opposite. Well.
It's like Elon Musk.
Right. Well, I think Howard Hughes really liked being around people that weren't starstruck by fame, and Ben Johnson was a real guy. And he would take care of Howard Hughes' horse. I think his name was Cherokee Charlie. Wow. And they would go riding together, and Ben said that one time that that Howard Hughes sometimes would stick a $100 bill in his pocket, and so he interacted with Howard Hughes and was in the Outlaw. Then he started getting more work as a wrangler, and then as a stuntman, and it was in a lot. I mean, I've actually had a hard time finding everything he was in, because a lot of times he was uncredited. One of the things I've really tried to do in this book is put together a comprehensive filmography, and I can't count how many times I've been out to the Motion Picture Academy Library doing research, but I think I've put together the most comprehensive filmography of Ben, and a lot of it is just poring over records, going back and look at studio records, which is difficult because sometimes the studios don't exist anymore. But from being a wrangler and a stuntman, he was working as a stuntman on a movie called Fort Apache, John Ford movie. John Wayne was in it. And there was a scene where a wagon with some horses was running away, and he was able to ride in there and stop it. Some people say it was getting ready to go over a cliff, and others say it was just getting ready to overturn. It was going too fast,
right.
And stopped it. And this is according to Harry Carey Jr. He said Ford went up to John Wayne and said, and Ben Johnson was doubling John Wayne, and John Ford asked one of the people standing on the sidelines, who's that doubling Johnny? He said, oh, he's a guy from Oklahoma named Ben Johnson. And Ben later said that that Ford called him into his office and put him under contract. And there are some people say, well, that maybe that happened later, but he always said that it was because of Fort Apache that he got into the movie business. And from then on, he started working in John Ford's westerns, Fort Apache, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, Rio Grande, and then it was on Rio Grande that they had a falling out, and he didn't work for Ford, I think, for 11 or 12 years.
What was your understanding on the falling out that they had?
Well, there are several versions of that, which I've come to realize is kind of the case many times with some of these stories.
We all heard it was because he decided to go rodeoing. And they didn't want him to go rodeoing.
Yeah, I think
that year.
I think that was part of it, but he said that on Rio Grande, he and Dobie Carey were filming some scenes, and they would all, at the end of the day, they would go to Goulding's Lodge where they were staying, and they would have a big dinner, all the cast and crew together, long tables. I've seen photographs of it. And Ben said in his oral history interview that he turned to Dobie Carey and said something like, well, we didn't shoot many Indians today, did we? And John Ford heard this and apparently thought this was some criticism of what he had done, and he said, and I'm just repeating what's in the oral history. He said something along the lines, what did you say? And Ben said, I was just talking to Dobie, Mr. Ford. And he said, what did you say? And he repeated it, and then John Ford said, what did you say, stupid? And Ben said he got up, went over to Ford, leaned over, and told him what he could do with this picture, and stormed out. Dobie Carey told me that, no, that's not what happened. He said Ben just got up and left. And Maureen O'Hara, in her autobiography, pretty much said the same thing. But she said, we were all shocked because we thought his treatment of Ben was so bad. And Ben later said he thought he was going to get fired, from the film. And instead, he said, Dobie Carey said the next day it was like nothing had happened. They just, carried on, finished the film. But then Ford didn't call him again until Cheyenne Autumn came out, and that was like 11 or 12 years. So he held a grudge.
He was hard to get along with, Ford. Everything I've ever read about him, he was real domineering, and even John Wayne was scared of him.
I think Dobie Carey said John Ford couldn't get along with John Ford. So
right,
yeah, he was. I've read several biographies of him, and he could be really tough on people, and I think he was jealous of Ben. Frankly, part of it.
I heard one story that Ben told when he came back here that Ben liked to fish. He was a big sportsman, and they were filming somewhere, and John Ford was telling Ben about a fishing hole somewhere over that mountain or over that hill. When we get done, you can go fishing or whatever. And Ben and somebody went when they got done, took off on the horses to go fishing. And while they were gone, as soon as they got over the hill, John Ford said, "All right, let's load up and go." And they went back to town and left them there, and they had to ride 25 miles back to town. He was just that kind of guy.
I heard that, yeah.
Oh, you heard a story like that?
Yeah.
And he was hard. Like I say, John Wayne was scared of him.
Sounded like a cantankerous old son of a gun.
He was. Yeah.
He had a long career too, it seemed like, though.
Wow.
From
did he ever?
silent movies all the way to
Right.
him calling Ben to take the last picture show.
Yeah, and Ben said John Wayne really didn't like horses that much, and which is kind of ironic, isn't
Right.
it? But Ben was the real deal, and I think that's why he and Ford maybe didn't locked horns. Was I think there was some jealousy there. He was authentic. He was a real deal, and I think Ben said that Ford looked like a sack of walnuts on a horse.
Yeah. Right. Wow.
His early years right here in Osage County. Ben, did you get much on that?
Yeah, I went out to the ranch and looked around the bunkhouse and all that. And then I'll tell you what was really helpful was when there was a cowboy reunion here. And a guy from the University of Tulsa, Jim Ronda, came out and interviewed a lot of those cowboys. And the transcripts are now at the University of Tulsa. I got a hold of those. And those guys were, oh my goodness, the stories that they had. That was so helpful to have that cowboy reunion, those cowboy reunion transcripts. Those guys told so many wonderful stories. Oscar Wright, Raisin Rhodes. They were just full of wonderful stories. And I remember one of them, if I can just tell you one real quickly here. It was about Ben Johnson and his father and some of the cowboys were going out looking for, I think it was a lost calf, or I can't remember. I can't remember the details of the animal, but they were, I guess, way up in one of the far pastures, and they were in a car, and he told and the elder Ben told his son to get out on the fender and rope the animal while they were going. And one of the cowboys turned to him and he said, "Ben, you're going to get that boy killed." And he's something along the lines of, "Well, he might as well get killed doing something he loves, rather than doing something in the city." Mm-hmm. And just things like that, just kind of captured the flavor of what the ranch was like in the early days. So
yeah, he grew up a real cowboy. I mean, he really didn't know anything else besides probably cowboying growing up, I wouldn't think.
What kind of relationship did he have with his dad? Did you get into that any?
Yeah, I did. He often said his father was his hero, mm-hmm. and he admired him, of course. And he wanted to, but he was also competitive. He wanted to win a world championship. He wanted to, go rodeo. And Dobie Carey said that he felt that Ben carried some resentment about his parents getting divorced, and that he felt his father was too hard on him. Was the main thing he said. He felt like he had to prove himself a lot in front of the other cowboys, and he would complain and say, my father gave me the hard way around and things like that. But in the end, he said his father was his biggest hero. Right. So I think he had mixed feelings, like many of us do about fathers. I think that's just normal. But I think there was a competitive streak there, mm-hmm. for sure.
A lot of people don't know that his dad was world-class roper himself. Mm-hmm. He's 1922?
Yeah.
World champion steer roper.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people get that confused because we have every year a roping in his name, the Ben Johnson mm-hmm. Memorial Steer Roping, and they all think that Ben Johnson Jr. won the steer roping world championship. Yeah. We get that all the time. I see it everywhere. Major people put it out, that he's a steer roping world champion, when in reality,
Team roping
world champion. Yeah. Team roping was a little different than it is now back then, but still the 1953 team roping world champion, not
mm-hmm.
steer roping.
Right. Yeah, different. Completely different, yeah.
And he's got quite a bit of world champion stock in his bloodline, too. His nephew, two-time world champion.
Yep.
The other nephew was another good roper and a good singer.
And the children, too, right?
Oh, yeah.
John Miller's kids.
Oh, John Miller's
yeah.
kids. Yeah. I don't know if there's any world champions in the line there. But
His daughter was some kind of women's champion, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
just
were
a year
all-
or two ago, wasn't she?
So,
They're all champions, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, they come from such a... And then his great nephew, Luke, right now, he won Texas Songwriter of the Year.
I heard that.
Just a couple years ago.
Helen was telling me that.
Yeah, and
That's
he's-
great.
And he's been on tour for the last couple of years, you know.
Yeah.
And his name's getting bigger and bigger all the time. Luke
Right.
Christensen, for anybody wanting to know who he is. He's got some great songs out. Did you talk to anybody about his rodeo days?
Yes, I did. I interviewed several people in Texas who knew him. There's a guy named Harry Tompkins who lives in or lived in Dublin, Texas, which isn't far from where I am. And I talked to him. I also met through some mutual friends a woman who was married to Lewis Brooks, and she told me about the days when Ben Johnson and Lewis Brooks, cowboyed together.
Lewis Brooks lived here for a long time.
Yeah.
Worked at the Chapman Barnard Ranch.
Yeah, and this was Nita Brooks Llewellyn was when I knew her. She was very, very, very helpful, and those were the folks I interviewed in Texas. Then I looked at a lot of transcripts and books written by other people or about other people who rodeoed with him, and I heard the podcast you did with John Miller. He talked about this some about. When you asked him a question about what it was like watching him. So I have a whole chapter on the rodeo. The year he took off to try for the team roping world champion, and found out that he'd gone to Japan, which was really interesting. I don't know whether that was the first time he went out of the country or not, but. Probably not. Let's see, I can't remember if he went to Mexico filming before then or not, but that must have been something for him to go to Japan. 'Cause I've been to Japan twice. People over there, they love anything Western. It's amazing. I'm sure he was probably like a rock star when he went over to Japan.
Jimbo, what can you tell us about that Japanese trip they made over there, them cowboys?
Well, I don't know a whole lot about it, but Casey Tibbs was right in the middle of it. And
He put them all together.
what a hero he had to be, You've got a picture of them out in front of the airplane with their 6-shooters. There's no telling what went on
He
over
was
there.
a wild man.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just a great trip, and I'd like to have been on it, But,
Somebody told us that Casey went broke and couldn't afford to get everybody back home, and they all had to get home on their own dime.
but I bet they took that country by storm.
And his book was a very helpful book about Casey Tibbs. He was very, very good. One thing that's great is these folks, when they tell stories, they're so vivid and such, strong language that paints a picture for you with dialogue. I mean, it's just wonderful having stories like that.
Your family has a little bit of a tie to Ben Johnson in the rodeo days, Jimbo, especially up at Pendleton, Oregon.
Yeah, we've got
Famous run.
You know,
Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Ben, before he was a team roper, he was a real good calf roper. I mean, world-class calf roper. And one year he set the arena record at Pendleton, 1949, and he was riding my grandfather's horse, Jake.
That was your grandfather's horse? Oh, I have a photograph of it
Yeah,
that I got
yeah.
from the Western Heritage
Yeah.
Museum.
Well, we have a photograph in the back that they don't have. Of
Oh.
Ben actually setting the
Well,
record.
it's up. It's not in the back. It's up there.
It's in the back of the museum.
Well, yeah.
Cool.
But, yeah, I mean, we're the only ones got that picture. Everybody's got that other picture.
The other picture
Yeah,
taken
and-
by, I forget the name.
DeVere.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And but I had that other one in a photo album, family photo album, and I gave it to Cody, and he blew it up. So as far as I know, me and Cody's the only ones got that picture.
Yeah, the famous picture, that actually wasn't the arena record-setting run. The arena record-setting run was in the first go-round, and that's the picture
Yeah.
up
Okay.
in there.
okay.
We have both pictures up on display, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's a little bit different picture than you're used to seeing. You can tell he's going to be fast on that calf, too.
Yeah,
He's
right.
stepping on down. I
that's
think he had a front leg in it, too.
Yeah, I had the front leg,
Yeah.
so he handled easy, and it just worked good. He set the arena record.
Well, I may need to get a copy of that picture because the one I have is from,
Yeah,
from
you-
DeVere. And I looked through all those pictures. They were, gosh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of a cool connection Jimbo has with.
Yeah. What was the name of the horse?
Jake.
Oh,
He was a Cross J bred horse from right over here on the ranch at No Water.
Wow.
Yep, he wanted to get on the best horse out there. Jimbo's granddad, 1956 world champion from right here in Pawhuska. We got quite a list of world champion cowboys from Pawhuska right here.
This area has amazing history. And Ben Johnson, man, he always wanted a good horse. He usually always got a really good horse.
I always liked watching him in the movies. He always rode a good horse. He didn't take something that the
Right.
stock people just give him. He
Right.
brought his own horse or was riding a good horse usually.
So what all did Ben do when he wasn't making movies? Did you know anything about his other activities that he was into?
Well, he always kept a foot in ranching and animals, and at one point, raised race horses and and had cattle. He got into real estate some when he was in California. Westlake Village was a big development out there in the San Fernando Valley, and where he and his wife Carol lived at one point, and he was involved, especially with promoting that. There are, one of my jobs as a biographer is tracking things down and making sure they're accurate, and I read many interviews with Ben where the reporter would say, well, Ben Johnson made a fortune in real estate in California and was worth $150 million.
You see that all the time.
I saw one $200 million, the richest cowboy to ever live.
But he didn't own all that land at Westlake Village, and I interviewed his brother-in-law, named John Jones, Carol's brother, before he died, and he said that's Ben was probably worth more like around $2 million, not $150 million.
Yeah, right.
But he was involved in developing some of that land out there that would have like a golf course and some acreage with a house and stables where people could put horses, and he was involved in that out there. And then of course charity work. That seemed to be what he devoted a lot of his time to, especially for kids. In Fort Worth, where I used to live, he did a lot of work in Fort Worth, and of course at the Houston Stock Show and Rodeo, and of course at the Lazy E in Guthrie. But in his later years, and then for the hospital, the Children's Hospital in Tulsa, I think, right? Or was it in Oklahoma City?
He probably donated to every children's hospital there is.
He spent so much time on charity work, and I guess because he and his wife didn't have children, he really tried to help kids.
Did you ever talk to Reba McEntire about him?
Reba, I tried, and she, for some reason, declined my request for an interview.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah.
And that happens. Ollie McGraw
She probably
did.
didn't know about it.
Some people, Ollie McGraw didn't. I mean, some people may not want to, especially with Ollie McGraw, she may not have wanted to talk about, some of the things that happened, or Steve McQueen, her ex-husband, or I don't know. But people, for various reasons, turn you down. Most people, when I tell them I want to talk to them about Ben Johnson and not about themselves, most of them say yes. So I haven't been turned down by many people.
He was a beloved man. When he first got out to Hollywood, and he met his wife, what soon to be his wife, Carol, his father-in-law. Kind of interesting cat. There's not a whole lot of information out there on him because he was such an early pioneer, I feel like, in the field. Fat Jones.
Right.
Clarence
Fat Jones. Oh, yeah, that's...
I thought you might have been related to him, actually.
No, there's so many Joneses here,
Yep,
but
yeah.
No, I'm not related to any of them. Yeah, Fat Jones, he was a legend. He and a few other places had stables where they would stock every kind of things needed for movie westerns. Wagons. I think he even had chariots, which wasn't for westerns, but for some other movies. But any kind of thing related to horses or cattle. Of course, stock animals. I mean, and I think his place was on Sherman Way, and he became one of the people that studios relied on to help make westerns authentic, and to have just all the herds that they need they needed to make the film. So he was definitely one of those early players, and that's where Ben met his wife Carol. Again, there are a couple stories about how that came about. He later said that the horses that he was bringing from Oklahoma to California for use on the Outlaw, when the train came in, he said there was this. He saw this attractive woman standing by the rail car waiting, and he started ordering around the other wranglers what to do with the horses, and she was said to comment, "Who is that jerk, and who does he think he is?" And it was Ben Johnson. Her brother John Jones told me, "Well, that's not really what happened. Actually, Ben had caught a really bad cold, and he was sick, and she was feeling sorry for him, and said, 'Hey, that guy needs some help.' And then they met, and had a courtship, and of course, he was spending a whole lot of time at the stables, and a love blossomed among the horses." So,
I think it's neat that you get to the bottom of some of the rumors, and how things got started, but you interviewed enough people, you got the scoop.
It's taken a lot of time, and there are some instances where I can't really, if I don't feel like I've got things confirmed, I just report, here's what this person said, here's what that person said,
Make up your own mind.
The definitive story is hard to find, but there are. It's just human nature. One person tells a story one way, or remembers something differently, and then you have to just really try to pin it down and cross-check everything.
What's the story on the Last Picture Show?
Oh, the Last Picture Show. That's one of my favorite films of all times. So I interviewed Larry McMurtry, who wrote the novel The Last Picture Show that the movie is based on, and I interviewed Peter Bogdanovich, who was the director of the movie The Last Picture Show, which won Ben Johnson an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. So, and I have a whole chapter in the book devoted to this. But so Peter Bogdanovich was living in California, and he and his wife, Polly Platt, were living out in Van Nuys, and he had gone into a pharmacy, and he had seen this novel, The Last Picture Show, up on a little book stand, and looked at it, was interested in it, and put it back. And then he later asked his wife, I saw this interesting book that I thought might make a good movie. Would you mind reading it and letting me know what you think? Well, she read it, and she said, "It's a great book, but I don't know how you're going to make a movie about it." And anyway, they figured out how to do it, and he got funding for the film, and then it came time to cast the part of the pivotal role of this guy Sam the Lion, who was kind of the moral center of the town, which is loosely based on Larry McMurtry's hometown of Archer City, but in the book is called Thalia. But it was kind of this town that was almost on the way out, dying, losing its young people, tumbleweeds blowing down the streets, dusty, up on the border of Texas, and he actually ended up filming it there. And so Sam the Lion was the guy who, when everything around him was falling down, his pool hall and his diner, they were kind of where everybody, especially the young people, kind of congregated, and they began to look up to him as a mentor. And then I'm not going to, I don't think I'm going to spoil anything here because the movie's been out so long, but Sam the Lion does die about, pretty soon after, maybe not quite halfway through the picture. So when the time came to cast Sam the Lion, Peter Bogdanovich told me, he said, I looked through all these books of actors and I didn't find anything, and I put it aside. And then, I looked again, and then he said, and then I saw Ben Johnson, and I smacked my head and said, of course, Ben Johnson. Well, he called up Ben. Ben read the script and told Peter Bogdanovich he didn't want to do it. Now, there are two versions of why he said this. Ben later said that that the script had too many dirty words in it. And he wasn't going to say those dirty words. And he didn't want his mother to see him in a movie saying all these dirty words. Well, Bogdanovich told me, he said, no, that's not right. He said, Ben just didn't like it because there were too many words. He didn't want to, there's a soliloquy where Ben Johnson is sitting by the stock tank with Timothy Bottoms, which arguably is what won him the Academy Award, but it's a long monologue. And he said, Ben didn't like the words, like saying the words. So he turned me down. So Bogdanovich called up John Ford and said, I've got this great part for Ben. He won't do it. And of course, Bogdanovich had become friends with John Ford over the years. And John Ford said, why won't he do it? And Bogdanovich said, because he says it's got too many words. And Ford said, Ben, he always says that. So he calls Ben, and later Ben recollected this in his oral history. He said he was making a movie somewhere, and he said the phone rang, and it was John Ford. And he said, Ben, I want you to do me a favor. And he said, what's that, Mr. Ford? He said, I want you to do Peter's movie. He said, it's a good part. You should take it. And so Ben calls Bogdanovich. He says, hey, you put the old man on me. He got on to me about doing this. And Bogdanovich had to talk him into it. And he said, look, Ben, you're going to win an Academy Award if you do this. And finally said, and then he finally said, okay, I'll do the damn thing. So that's how he got the part. And if you go back and you watch that monologue, it's just the weather changes. And Peter Bogdanovich said they did it in one take because of the way it would start raining. There was going to be a storm. They weren't going to be able to get all the trucks out of there. He said they did it in one take, and they left, and this rainstorm, came down. But this man who said that he didn't like saying words in movies, what does he do? He gives this Academy Award-winning monologue. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is. That's a great scene. I remember it. That's where the Cheeses are from, was down in there. They moved here in 68 or 9 from Archer City, or right in that area.
No kidding.
They knew a lot of those people down there and stuff.
Nice folks from there. Rough place to live, looks like to me, Jimbo.
Yeah.
Ben Johnson, we had a video that plays of him in the back and has a little interview with him. He said, there's 1,000 actors out there can play any part.
Yeah.
But there's only one that can play Ben Johnson. And he said, that's me.
Yeah.
What about his Academy Award winning speech? What do you remember from that?
Oh, well,
it was really something.
Yeah, this back in the days before the internet. Again, I went out to California. I made an appointment, and to watch the video of his speech, and he said that he had written a speech, had written it down, and he went out there and he said that the more he read it, the phonier it sounded, and so. And he wasn't really expecting to win anyway, but he had prepared a speech. So, but he just said when his name was announced, and he goes up on the stage, and he holds the Academy Award, and I believe it was Sally Kellerman and Richard. Who's the Irish actor? Richard. Name escapes me now. They were the ones who presented it to him. And he holds the Academy Award, looking at it, and he says, "Oh, ain't that purty?" And then he says, I was going to give a speech, and the more I read it, the phonier it sounded. And he said, "What I'm going to say," I'm paraphrasing here because what I'm about to say is going to shock the whole world. This couldn't have happened to a nicer fella.
Yeah.
And the crowd roared, with laughter, and of course gave him a standing ovation. Yeah. And it's just, and he looks so happy. He's wearing a tuxedo with his hair slicked back. Mm-hmm. And his wife was in the audience, and his mother, I believe. And I think Helen was too.
Yeah, I think Helen went out there.
Yeah,
for that.
yeah. And
T-shirts made. Couldn't happen to a nicer fella.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah. And I just think that's, again, it was so authentic.
Right. Yeah, that was him,
Mm-hmm.
What kind of career did he have after that? How many more movies did he do after The Last Picture Show?
Well, actually, he after that, he said, Hollywood finally started to recognize, that I could act, in things besides westerns. And so I think his roles got more diverse. One of my favorites, and Helen's too, she told me, is his role as Melvin Purvis in Dillinger. He was mean. In fact, Dobie Carey said, he said, "Oh man, Ben is mean in that movie. He's got mean eyes," But he did a great job in Dillinger, and just as John Ford had used him in his pictures, directors like Sam Peckinpah started relying on Ben to do their pictures. So he became a stock actor, if you want to call it that, for Peckinpah. Was in a lot of Peckinpah films, and a lot of those were westerns. But then he would do really diverse roles. Like I remember he was in a movie with Burt Reynolds and Kathryn Deneuve called Hustler, which was about, I think, an L.A. cop, and he plays the father of a murdered woman, and that his daughter has been murdered. And I think there's some great acting in that as well. So he did, and then when Spielberg did his first full feature film, The Getaway, he was in that as a lawman. He kind of pivoted from being a cowboy to a lawman in a lot of the later movies that he did. So it diversified his roles. I think it gave him a lot of credibility, and he sure didn't lack for work. I mean, that man was working all the time. And when you look at his filmography, I mean, almost every year he was in something.
For sure, it was a lot of Western sitcoms too, like Virginia.
Yeah.
And
Bonanza and all that stuff.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
And then later the Bonanza remakes. He did the Bonanza remakes too.
And he has a distinction that only one man in the whole world has. What is that?
Only person to win an Academy Award and a World Rodeo Championship.
Yep.
And he's from right here.
Right.
Born, raised, and buried.
Yeah, I've been to his grave.
What about his death? What do you know about it when he died?
Yeah, Gertie Epps, who took care of his mother and Ben, told me exactly what happened. Leisure World in Mesa, Arizona is amazing. It's a huge retirement community with a big wall around it and a gigantic globe. And it's like multiple complexes, multiple golf courses, stucco houses with clay tile roofs. Really nice, but not, ostentatious. And he lived in one area of Leisure World, and his mother lived pretty close by. And after Carol died, he would often go to his mother's house, for dinner and go back home and things like. Gertie said he was pretty lonely at night, without his wife. And Dobie Carey said that they had been in Italy, Bergamo, I think it was, and he noticed that for a film festival. And he noticed that when they were coming back on the plane, he said Ben had caught a cold and wasn't feeling good, and he was worried about him. And he, when he came back to Leisure World, he went one morning, called up Gertie and asked her to make him some biscuits, and apparently he loved rice, and put the rice cooker on. He was going to go down over there for breakfast. So he goes over to his mother's house. And he goes into the bathroom, and she hears a thud, and she goes in, and he's lying on the floor against the tub, and she said, and he looked at her and said, Gertie, I can't help you. He couldn't get himself up, and she called, an ambulance. By then, when they came, they said he was dead. So he had health problems off and on for a while. I think he had blood clots in his legs, but his friends were really worried about him.
Yeah. I remember getting sometimes you just remember where you were or who told you, and I remember Joe came out and told me that Ben Johnson died.
Yeah. Is the story I told you, is that what you pretty much heard too?
I just heard he died visiting his mother or something.
Yeah. Well, and then the sad thing, I mean, then she came in and said, where's Ben? And Gertie had to tell her he's gone, And Harry Carey Jr. told me, the saddest story, too. He said Buster Brown, who was kind of an assistant to Ben in Mesa, he said, Buster called me and said, Ben's gone. And Dobie Carey said, well, where'd he go? And he said, no, I mean, he's gone, you know. And Dobie wrote a poem that that was read at the funeral that he gave me permission to reprint in the book. So he really took it hard. Yeah. They were such good friends for so many years. You know, they did a lot of Western film festivals together and saw each other regularly. And he came out to the ranch when Ben Johnson's father was alive, and that's when he told me, he said I could still feel some friction there. He said there was love, but there was some friction too between the two men.
Ben brought him out to my house. I wasn't born yet, but we lived out west of town, and Ben got Everett Shaw, an old rope, real famous roper, to splice on the end of the rope for him, make his rope a little bit longer. And Joe said that Dobie or Harry Carey Jr. just stood there, didn't say much, but just watched. You know, he said he was a nice guy.
Yeah,
so he was here a lot.
He said when he was staying here, when he came with Ben, he said, Ben's father got him up early in the morning. He said Ben did not like to get up early. He said his father woke him up by saying, "Get up, you Hollywood sons of bitches."
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Right before Ben's death.
He was a loved guy around here. We're right in the middle of a podcast, Anna.
He had finished. Actually, it was a sequel. It was another McMurtry book. It was the sequel to The Evening. It was the sequel to Terms of Endearment. Yeah, he had just finished doing The Evening Star, and in Houston. And I think that he was having some problems, some health problems when he was in Houston too. But he died before the film came out, and it was dedicated to him posthumously. The Evening Star was.
Now, they had a service for him in Arizona, didn't they?
Yes.
And then brought him back to Pawhuska?
Yeah. The service apparently was like standing room only. I think they had bring in an outdoor tent. And I think Rusty Richards sang, and I mean, it was a big deal. Tom Selleck told me he came for it. Of course, Dobie Carey spoke. And then he was, buried here with Carol.
Yeah.
I think their tombstone says precious memories, and his father, and I think his stepmother is there too.
Yeah.
And Ollie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the first things I did when the first trip I made to Pawhuska, I actually went out there. I thought, well, I need to pay my respects, So I went out to the cemetery, and I stood over there and I said, Ben, I got a big job here, and anything you can do to help me, I'd appreciate. But I wanted to tell you what I'm doing, and I think if you were here, you'd say, just don't make it one of those Hollywood,
Right.
made-up stories. So,
Right.
It sounds like one, though.
Yeah.
well,
If you're telling how he ended up in Hollywood and the whole
I know it.
shooting match, it sounds like a Hollywood
and
story.
when you think about, think about the people he worked with. I mean, Howard Hughes, John Ford, Howard Hawks on Red River,
John Wayne.
Peckinpah.
Stanley Kubrick, Marlon Brando on One-Eyed Jacks, And the stories on
McQueen, Reynolds.
Steve McQueen, Burt Reynolds,
You name
Steven
it.
Spielberg, on Steven Spielberg's
His first major movie.
First feature film. I mean, that's all.
Clint Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood, yeah. Oh, I have a great scene from Hang 'em High. Oh my gosh! And another guy I interviewed who was just great was oh gosh, I'm sitting here and I can't remember his name. He just died recently. Who was in Hang 'em High? But that first scene where Ben Johnson where Clint Eastwood is strung up. He's falsely accused of a crime. He's hanging. Ben Johnson sees him. He's on this rise on his horse. He rides in, cuts him down, catches him. That really happened, of course. And I think some people were watching on the sideline, saying, "Oh, there's no way he's going to do this." And someone said, "Oh, you just watch him. He's gonna do this just fine." And he did.
Ben was riding that black horse he rode in a lot of movies too.
Yeah.
I don't know what his name was, but
Yeah, he had a lot of. I forget the name of the horse. I mean, of course, he had Blackie.
It may have been
Steel.
Blackie.
I mean, that was an early one. But he always had a favorite horse. I think later Greylark was one of his favorites. Yeah.
That's a great roping horse, old Greylark.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, and I think that was in his later years when he had Greylark.
How long before, when we get this book out, how long before somebody's going to want to make a movie out of it?
Well, I tell you, with so much attention right now on the Osage, I'm hoping that happens, and again, when you look at all the people he intersected with, I mean, I think that would be a wonderful film, and I'm going to try to do that.
You heard it here first.
Yes, we'll have the world premiere here in Pawhuska,
Right,
and
absolutely.
y'all are going to be famous in the film industry now.
Everybody from here knows him as Ben's son Johnson,
Yes.
and everybody outside of here knows him as Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, and a lot of people called him Ben Jr., but one thing I realized when I was working on the book is he and his father had different names, so it's really not correct to say Ben Sr. and Ben Jr., but he was, known here as son, but most people in the film industry called him Ben or Uncle Ben.
Well, what else you got for her, Jimbo?
Oh, I don't know. That's just interesting. I can't wait for the book to come out. And then, like I say, then it'll be a movie, no doubt. So here we go.
Well,
If you were making a Mount Rushmore of Western actors, 4 of them, we already know Ben Johnson's on there.
yeah.
I guess, we could go as far as the directors on there, too. Actors or directors,
Well, you probably have to put John Wayne on there, and
no doubt.
probably John Ford, And who would the fourth one be?
This would be a tough one. Eastwood could be on there.
Yeah.
Could be. Selleck could be on there.
Randolph Scott.
Randolph
Scott. Yeah.
Did
Probably
he ever
him.
act with Randolph? Was he ever in the movie with Randolph Scott?
I'd have to go look at my filmography. He was in the movie. He doubled so many people. Mm-hmm. It's astounding. Or he would wrangle, or he would walk on and do a little bit role. I mean, and not be credited. It was.
He's a member of the Stuntman Hall of Fame.
Yeah. I mean, he worked with just about everybody.
Randolph Scott owns some oil wells over by Fairfax. He has an Osage County tie, too.
Well, who doesn't?
Well, then then the 101 Ranch. I mean, that was involved in everything too. And one of the things I did early this year, I drove to Clinton, Oklahoma, and I heard that the Mohawk Lodge there that has an amazing collection of Indian artifacts, Native American artifacts, and cowboy memorabilia. I had heard that the owner of that her mother had gotten, it's a little leather case, very soft leather, that's etched, and it says on the top, Ben Johnson, I forget the date on there, but it's etched on there, and it's a shaving kit with straight razors and a strop and everything. But that apparently belonged to Ben's father, and I had heard that he worked on the 101 Ranch when he was young, but this was the only thing I had actually seen that, like maybe evidence for that. So that's one of another thing I had tried to pin down was, did he really work for the 101 Ranch?
I think he
sure
competed
could've.
in some of the rodeos, because I think there's a picture in the back that we have of Ben Johnson Sr. at a 101 Ranch.
Yeah.
And I think I saw one at the Mohawk too. Yeah, there was a guy holding his hat up like he used to, and it looked just like him.
We have one in the back, and I don't know how it can't be the 101 Ranch. It is the 101 Ranch, and it's Ben Johnson Sr.
Right.
But, they were the early predecessors to a lot of rodeos, the 101 Ranch. They'd have an actual contest during the ranch, the show.
And that's what made the story so fascinating, would be if his father had worked there, then he worked for basically the precursor of the Western film, So it was such an interesting line there. And but Michael Wallace of Tulsa, and his wrote a really I think a great book about the 101, and he mentioned that shaving kit in there. So I called Michael in Tulsa and said, "Do you remember this? Where can I find this?" And he said, "Well, I think it was at the Mohawk Lodge." Well, I tracked down the woman who owned the Mohawk, and she had it. And I went out there to Clinton. I photographed it this summer. And Michael, in his book, said that he believed that Ben Johnson's father worked there as a barber, and then later broke horses, I think, for the English Army during World War I, and that was the first I'd heard of that. But I thought, if that would really tie everything together.
It makes sense. He left home when he was 14 years old to be a cowboy on his own. Ben Johnson Sr. We got a picture of him in the back holding a shotgun and a bottle of whiskey and a rope. 14 years old. It's pretty cool.
People grew up fast back then.
Yeah, they did things like that back then.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I hope I can come back when the book's out and discuss that.
Oh,
For sure. You have to come back during Ben Johnson days and do a book signing.
Yes, I've been wanting to do that for years. So
We've added a lot to it. Now it's about both men. The roping's still about Ben Johnson Sr., but the whole weekend is honoring both guys.
Yes, and that's a very good thing.
Father's Day weekend every year. Mark your calendars and get over here and see it. And get over here and see the museum. Get over there and see the Buck and Flamingo Turquoise Shop. They help keep this deal going.
They newly expanded Buck and Flamingo Turquoise Shop.
That's right. That's right. Newly expanded. We have it there for you. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And
thank you, Cody. Thank you, Jimbo.
Can't wait for the book.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. Me too.
See y'all next week.
Old stories like long lost friends, rodeos and late night bends, history before our time, round pens and pasture rides, cowboys of the Osage.